Right now today, there is a countdown running on your container garden, and it has nothing to do with frost. It is daylight. Every single day from here forward, you get a little less of it, and vegetables need a minimum amount of daylight just to keep growing new leaves and roots. Once your daylight hours drop below that minimum, your plants do not slow down. They stop completely. Doesn't matter if it's 60 degrees and sunny outside. No light, no growth. Gardeners have a name for this dead zone. They call it the Persephone period, but forget the name for now. Just remember the rule. Whatever you plant has to basically finish growing before the days get too short, or it sits there half-grown until spring. Depending on where you live, that shutoff hits anywhere from early November to the middle of December. Which means if you're growing in pots, on a balcony, or in a tiny bed, you have roughly one shot left to fill your containers with something worth eating before winter, and most people are about to waste it. Here's why this hits container growers harder than anyone else. If you've got a big backyard plot, you can afford to plant late, mess up, replant. You've got room. In a pot, you don't. Every inch has to earn its spot, and what you choose to plant this week decides whether you're harvesting through November or staring at empty dirt. And here's the upside nobody tells you about. Cold doesn't just get tolerated by these plants, it actually improves them. Several of the vegetables on this list respond to dropping temperatures by turning their stored starches into sugar, so the exact same plant tastes sweeter in November than it ever would have in July. You're not settling for a smaller harvest before winter. You're growing something better than what summer gave you, in a space most people assume is too small to bother with. 7 vegetables, all built for containers, all with exact pot sizes, and spacing so nothing here needs a backyard. Number 5 is a carrot bred over 100 years ago specifically to grow in shallow soil, which solves the one thing that keeps most container growers from ever bothering with carrots. Number 7 skips staking and trellising completely, which almost nothing else in the pea family can say. Miss this window and all 7 wait until spring. Let's get into it. I post small space growing guides like this every week, so if pots, balconies, and tight beds are your kind of gardening, go ahead and subscribe now so you do not miss what is coming for fall. And while you are here, drop a comment telling me where you are watching from. I want to see how many climates are represented under one video. 1. Little gem lettuce. Most people hear heading lettuce and picture rows stretching across a garden bed, which is exactly why they never try it in a pot. Little gem breaks that assumption entirely. It grows upright and dense, reaching a full 6 to 8 inches tall while asking for only about 6 inches of space around it, which means a single medium container can hold several heads at once. The reason August timing matters here comes down to how the seed itself works. Lettuce seed needs light to trigger germination, and it also shuts down hard once soil temperatures climb past the mid-70s. Bury the seed too deep or plant during the hottest stretch of the month, and it will simply refuse to sprout. The fix is almost embarrassingly simple. Scatter the seed on the surface and press it in, or cover it with the thinnest possible layer of vermiculite. Nothing more. From sowing to harvest takes 35 to 55 days, so an August planting lands you a fully formed head well before the coldest part of fall arrives. And these are not fragile. Once hardened off, Little Gem tolerates temperatures down to about 20 degrees Fahrenheit, which means you are not racing a single frost date. You can hold heads in the container and pull them as you need them across several cold weeks. Pair it in the same pot with radishes or carrots, and you are using vertical and horizontal space that would otherwise sit empty. What you end up with is a dense, sweet, almost buttery romaine-style heart, nothing like the bitter, sun-stressed lettuce that gives up in July. It holds its shape and crunch even after a light frost, which is the opposite of what most people expect from a leafy green in cold weather. One small trick that makes a real difference in August specifically. If your container sits somewhere that gets brutal afternoon sun, move it into partial shade for the first week after sowing, or prop up a piece of cardboard to break the direct light during the hottest hours. That alone can be the difference between seeds that sprout evenly and seeds that just sit in the soil doing nothing. Once true leaves appear, move the pot back into full sun, since from that point on it wants all the light it can get to bulk up before the days get too short. Lettuce solves your space problem. This next one solves your failure problem too. Bloomsdale spinach has a reputation problem. Most people tried growing it once, watched it bolt within 2 weeks, and decided it just was not worth the effort. That failure almost always traces back to spring planting, not to spinach itself. Bloomsdale long-standing is an heirloom variety built for exactly this transition into fall. Its leaves are heavily savoyed, meaning they are deeply crinkled rather than flat, and that texture actually traps a thin layer of insulating air around the leaf surface. As temperatures drop, the plant also starts storing sugars in its tissue, which function almost like natural antifreeze, letting it shrug off temperatures down to around 25 degrees Fahrenheit without damage. Germination is the one hurdle. Spinach seed becomes unreliable once soil temperatures pass the upper 60s and essentially stops germinating altogether above 77 degrees. 2 fixes solve this. You can chill moist seed in the refrigerator for about 7 days before sowing, which resets its internal clock, or you can soak it in water for 24 hours, which cuts germination time roughly in half. Either way, you are working around the heat rather than hopping it cooperates. Give it a container at least 8 inches deep, space seedlings 4 to 6 inches apart for airflow, and feed it well since spinach pulls a lot of nitrogen from the soil to fuel that leaf growth. A diluted organic fish emulsion worked in every couple of weeks keeps that leaf production steady right up until the days get too short for new growth to form at all. Airflow matters more with spinach than people expect. Crowd the seedlings and you invite fungal issues in the damp, cool weeks of fall, which is exactly the kind of problem that can quietly wipe out an otherwise healthy planting. Thin on schedule and resist the urge to leave extra seedlings in for a bigger-looking pot. Harvest from the outside in, taking the mature outer leaves while the center crown keeps pushing new growth. One planting can keep feeding you for weeks, and the flavor that comes out of cold soil is noticeably sweeter and more tender than anything spinach produces in the heat. Some growers even shear the entire plant down to about 3 centimeters above the soil line partway through the season, which sounds aggressive, but actually resets it for a second flush of tender new leaves. If spinach is the slow burn, this next one is the fastest thing in your whole container lineup. 3. French breakfast radishes get filed under spring crops in most people's minds, which means gardeners miss the version of this vegetable that actually performs best. French breakfast is an heirloom radish shaped like a small cylinder, mild and crisp, with a red body that fades into a blunt white tip. It asks for almost nothing from a container standpoint, needing a pot only about 6 inches deep to produce a full-sized root. Speed is the real advantage here. From seed to harvest takes just 25 to 30 days, which means a radish planted in the first week of August can be on your table before the month is even finished. Sprouting happens fast too, usually within 3 to 7 days. The technique that determines success comes down to 2 things. Pre-moisten your potting soil before sowing so the tiny seeds do not clump or wash to one side when you water. Then thin aggressively, down to 1 to 2 inches apart, within the first 10 days after seedlings emerge. Skip that thinning step and the plants will pour their energy into leafy tops instead of forming a proper root. Keep moisture consistent through the whole cycle too, because any stretch of dryness turns the root woody and unpleasantly hot. Because it moves so fast, French breakfast doubles as a smart use of space next to slower crops. Sow it between rows of carrots, and it acts almost like a placeholder, marking the row and getting harvested completely before the carrots even need the room. Timing your rows also solves a problem most people never think about until they hit it. A single sowing gives you 1 batch already at once, which is more radishes than most households eat in a week. Instead, sow a small pinch every 10 days through the middle of August. That staggered approach means a steady trickle of fresh radishes rather than one overwhelming harvest followed by nothing. What you pull out at the end is a mild, crisp, faintly peppery root, Nothing like the sharp, pithy radishes people remember from a bad batch grown in summer heat. Pull them as soon as they hit size 2. A radish left sitting in the container even a few days past ready turns woody fast, so check the shoulders poking up at the soil surface and harvest the moment they look full. Radishes reward speed. Number 4 rewards patience, and it pays off harder than anything else on this list. 4. Dwarf blue curled Scotch Kale has an image problem in small spaces. Most people picture the tall, sprawling Siberian types that eat up half a raised bed, and they assume every kale variety behaves the same way. Dwarf blue curled Scotch, sometimes sold as Vate's kale, tops out at 12 to 16 inches, a size that fits a container without swallowing it. This is where the sweetness mechanism really shows up, and it is worth understanding because it applies to more than just kale. When temperatures drop toward freezing, the plant responds by converting stored starches into sugar. It is a survival response, a way of lowering the freezing point inside its own cells, but the side effect is flavor. A kale leaf harvested after a hard frost is measurably sweeter and more tender than the same leaf picked in September warmth. This same starch-to-sugar shift is part of why several other cold season crops on this list improve with the calendar instead of declining. Sow in the middle of August, and you are looking at about 55 days to maturity, with a 10-inch pot giving the roots enough room to support that compact frame. Cold hardiness here is serious. This variety tolerates down to 25 degrees Fahrenheit and will keep standing under a light dusting of snow without damage. Harvest from the bottom, taking the older outer leaves first and leaving the central growing point untouched. That growing point keeps producing fresh leaves for months, which means one plant in one container can realistically feed you from October well into the coldest part of the year in many climates. Because it's a brassica, kale draws in the same pests that go after cabbage and broccoli, and August happens to be peak season for them. Flea beetles in particular can chew through a young seedling in a single day if it is left unprotected. A simple cover of fine insect netting over the container in the first couple of weeks after transplanting solves this without any spray at all, and it is worth setting up before you see damage rather than after. If you are finding this useful, this is a good spot to hit subscribe, since I am building out a full run of these small space guides through the rest of the fall. And I would genuinely like to know, drop a comment with where you are watching from and what zone you are gardening in. Someone growing in your exact conditions is probably reading the comments section right now. 4 down. Here is the one that fixes the vegetable most container gardeners have completely given up on. 5. Parigi carrots are the vegetable most container gardeners quietly give up on. Standard varieties need soil that is loose and stone-free for a foot or more, and in a shallow pot that just is not available, so the roots end up stunted, forked, or twisted into something barely recognizable. Tonda di Parigi solves this by being shaped completely differently. This is a 19th century French heirloom, also sold as Parisian market, and instead of growing a long tapering root, it forms a round, almost spherical carrot only about 1 to 2 inches across. That shape needs depth of maybe 8 inches, not 12 or 18, which puts real carrot growing within reach of a genuinely shallow container. Direct sow the seed rather than starting it elsewhere and transplanting, since any disturbance to that round root while it is forming will stunt it. Germination is slow and a little unpredictable, often taking 10 to 25 days. So patience matters here more than with anything else on this list. Once seedlings are up, thin them to about 2 inches apart to prevent the roots from crowding each other underground. A light mix of bone meal into the soil at planting time gives the roots the phosphorus they need without pushing excess leaf growth, which is the opposite of what you want in a root crop. From sowing to harvest runs 55 to 65 days, landing you a harvest in the cooler weeks of October, when carrots naturally sweeten from the cold. The same starch-to-sugar shift that made the kale so much better after frost. Pull one out and it looks almost nothing like a grocery store carrot. It is round, deep orange, and genuinely sweet enough to eat straight from the soil. A quick note on soil texture, since this trips up more container gardeners than almost anything else on this list. Regular garden soil straight from the ground compacts hard in a pot and will still distort even a round root. Stick with a proper potting mix built from peat moss, coconut coir, and perlite, since that blend stays loose enough for the root to expand evenly in every direction as it develops. Carrots were the problem crop. This next one is the one people skip for no real reason at all. 6. Choy Choy. Bok choy rarely makes it into small space gardens because most people have only seen the full-sized version, which spreads wide and crowds out anything planted near it. Choy is an actual dwarf variety, staying around 5 inches tall and wide, small enough that several plants fit comfortably in one container. What makes it particularly suited to an August planting is that it handles heat and resists bolting significantly better than standard bok choy. That matters because it means you can get it in the ground while summer heat is still lingering and trust it to carry through into properly cool fall weather without flowering prematurely and turning bitter. Give it a pot at least 10 inches deep, space plants about 6 inches apart, and expect maturity in just 30 to 35 days, one of the fastest turnarounds on this entire list. You have flexibility in how you harvest it too. Cut the outer leaves progressively over about 6 weeks for a rolling harvest, or take the whole compact head at once if you want it for a single meal. Fresh bok choy loses its signature crunch within days of being cut, which is exactly why the grocery store version rarely lives up to what this plant is actually capable of. Grown at home and harvested straight from the container, the stems stay genuinely crisp, and the leaves hold a clean, mild sweetness that fades fast once picked. So growing your own is the only real way to taste it at its best. Like the kale, this is a brassica, so the same flea beetle and cabbage looper pressure applies here too. If you are already covering your kale with insect netting, extend that same cover over the bok choy container while seedlings are small and vulnerable. Once the plants are a few weeks in and growing steadily, they can generally handle the netting coming off, though leaving it on costs you nothing if you would rather not think about it again. Last one. And it breaks a rule every other pea variety forces you to follow. 7. Tom Thumb dwarf peas are usually the first thing ruled out in a small garden, mostly because people assume every variety needs a trellis, netting, or some kind of vertical support system that a tiny space simply cannot accommodate. Tom Thumb is the exception, and it has been for a long time. This is a true dwarf variety dating back to the 1850s, growing just 10 to 18 inches tall as a compact, self-supporting bush. No staking, no netting, nothing to build. Sow it in August, and it spends the last weeks of summer heat establishing itself, then shifts into its most productive stretch as autumn temperatures set in, since peas genuinely prefer cool weather over hot. Give it an 8-inch deep pot with about 3 inches between seeds, and soak the seeds overnight in cool water before planting to speed germination along. From sowing to first harvest takes 50 to 60 days, putting your first pods on the table by mid-fall. Cold hardiness here is strong too, with plants tolerating temperatures down to about 20 degrees Fahrenheit, so a stray early frost is not going to end your harvest early. What you get by the end is a genuinely heavy crop of sweet, tender pods from a plant small enough to sit on a windowsill ledge or a narrow balcony rail, something almost nothing else in the pea family can offer a container grower. Pair it with carrots or spinach in the same wide container if you have the room, since the pea's shallow, compact root system does not compete heavily with either for space below the soil. And once pods start forming, check every couple of days. Peas left on the vine even a little too long lose that snap and turn starchy, so picking on schedule matters just as much here as it does with the radishes. 7 vegetables. 1 closing window. Plant them this week, and you are eating from your containers well into November, while everyone who waited is staring at empty pots. August is not the last gasp of your container season. For anyone growing in a small space, it is the entrance into the best stretch of growing the whole year has to offer. Remember the actual deadline behind all of this. Once your daylight hours drop below that 10-hour threshold, Growth stops completely regardless of how warm it still feels outside, and exactly when that happens depends entirely on your latitude. Plant now, and everything on this list has time to reach near full size before that window shuts. Wait even a few weeks longer and you risk plants that never quite get there. One more thing worth knowing before you start. August is also peak season for pests like flea beetles and cabbage loopers, and your brassicas here, the kale and the bok choy, are their favorite targets. A simple length of lightweight insect netting over a few hoops keeps them off without any spray, and it takes about 10 minutes to set up. If you're rotating containers from earlier in the season, try to avoid putting these two back in the exact same pot or soil your spring brassicas used, since that habit alone cuts down on pest and disease buildup year over year. None of these 7 need a backyard, a raised bed, or any equipment beyond a decent container and consistent watering. That is really the whole point of this list. Small space growing gets treated like a limitation, but August is one of the months where it barely matters. A round carrot bred for shallow pots, a pea that skips staking entirely, a lettuce that heads up in a space the size of a dinner plate. None of that requires more room than a windowsill or a railing box already gives you. Which one of these 7 are you planting first, and what are you growing it in? A railing box, a 5-gallon bucket, a windowsill pot? Tell me in the comments, and while you're there, let me know where you're watching from and what zone you're working with. Someone gardening in your exact climate and container setup is very likely reading those comments right now. Subscribe if you want the rest of this fall series as it comes out. More small space growing guides every week.